Back in February of 2021, the Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal by Pennsylvania Republicans who wanted to disqualify mail-in ballots from the 2020 presidential election that arrived after the election, even though all the people had been told those would count. Now, at the time, 3 justices dissented from that decision not to take up the case. Justice Clarence Thomas was one of them. And he wrote an 11-page opinion calling the refusal to hear the case, quote, inexplicable. A year later, in January 2022, the Supreme Court rejected Donald Trump's attempt to block White House records from being sent to the January 6th committee, records like those we were discussing earlier in the program. Justice Clarence Thomas was the lone public dissenter in that order. Part of the reason those 2 cases are so relevant at this moment is because we now know that Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, was essentially an ally to the seditious conspiracy to overthrow the 2020 election. Not only did she openly admit to attending the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th, that while, legal in a sense of the First Amendment, had a corrupt intent to overthrow an election. She says she left before fellow Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. The Washington Post reported she, quote, repeatedly pressed White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to pursue unrelenting efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election in a series of urgent text exchanges in the critical weeks after the vote. So in that most recent ruling from February 2022, when Clarence Thomas alone argued against Trump having to turn over those White House records, which included, quote, call and visitor logs, handwritten notes, and other files previously kept by senior Trump aides like Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, he was ruling on turning over a body of evidence that very well could have included his wife's plotting. She was corresponding with major players in the White House like Mark Meadows. And he, in his official capacity, is saying that none of that material should be given to the committee investigating the insurrection. Pretty clear conflict. As a result, a handful of House Democrats, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, have called for Justice Thomas to resign or be impeached. Today, a group of 22 Democrats, led by Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington, sent a letter to Thomas and Chief Justice John Roberts demanding Thomas explain his failure to recuse himself in previous cases and that he, quote, promptly recuse himself from any future Supreme Court cases involving efforts to overturn the 2020 election or the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts joins me now. Senator, I want to start with an argument that I've seen Republicans make and that others have made through the long career of Clarence Thomas, when it has been known that his wife is an activist, that she works with conservative groups, she was involved in the Tea Party, that essentially it's unfair to go after a justice for whatever their spouse's politics happen to be. She's an independent adult, she's going to do what she wants, and this is Democrats barking up the wrong tree. What is your response to that?
Well, I have 2 responses to that. The first one is no one's going after her for her political point of view. The question is her participation in an insurrection against the government of the United States of America. That is something that is appropriate to investigate. And that then raises the question of conflict of interest for a sitting justice to have anything to do with a case involving that insurrection. But the second part I want to point out is that we have all kinds of times when, if you are in a position of public authority, like a Supreme Court judge or justice, then you do have to disclose certain information about your spouse, things that other folks out of the public wouldn't have to do. And the specific example here is that federal law requires that the spouses of the Supreme Court justices disclose payments that they have received, something that Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas have failed to do in violation of law multiple times. She received more than $680,000 from the Heritage Foundation, and yet somehow the Thomases just failed to report that. So I'm sorry, I think the Republicans are the ones who are just trying to throw up some smoke and hope people will start looking in some other direction. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, the conflict here, particularly on this, the question of the records at issue, seems like about as direct a conflict as you can get. I mean, if you're ruling on whether your wife's texts conceivably might be made public. Like, that's a pretty straightforward conflict, it would seem to me. I'm no law professor, ex-law professor, or senator.
You don't have to be an ex-law professor to figure that one out. And remember, the standard is conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict in a way that could undermine public confidence. Because ultimately, that's what this is about. This is about the fact that a sitting justice, obviously, should not be making rulings that could directly affect his spouse. But it's also about what it does for the rest of the public. To say, wait a minute, what's going on there? For the rest of the public to see that a sitting justice very well may be trying to protect his spouse. And since we don't know all the pieces to the puzzle yet, we're not quite sure all that he may be protecting his spouse from.
Yeah, I want to just play what you know. Again, you and others have called for this. There's been, in some ways, I think, a little bit of strange lack of outrage over this, because it seems like a incredibly incriminating set of facts on its face. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer essentially echoed this today. I want to just play you what he had to say.
I do think he should recuse himself. The information we know right now raises serious questions about how close Justice Thomas and his wife were to the planning and execution of the insurrection. And yes, I believe I'll answer both your questions. You were very clever. I think there should be some kind of code of ethics for Supreme Court justices.
On that last point, Senator, there is a code of ethics for Article III appointees, lifetime confirmed judicial judges. That I know, my wife clerked for federal judges, and it's important. You're not, if you're even a clerk, you're not given money to, candidates, things like that. It stops at the Supreme Court, right? Is that my understanding? That the Supreme Court just like do what you feel and kind of vibe out, and that does seem a little odd too.
Kind of. Remember, there's federal law about conflicts, and it applies across the board.
Yeah.
The trick is that there's enforcement against circuit court judges, district court judges, bankruptcy court judges, immigration court judges, anyone that violates those rules. With the Supreme Court, it's basically, you guys will take care of yourselves on this, right? And this is why for years now, I have advanced legislation, I have argued publicly that we need a set of enforceable ethics rules in the Supreme Court as well as in the other courts. And by the way, this should be about conflicts of interest, but it should also be about things like Supreme Court justices should not be able to own individual stocks or trade in individual stocks. Again, we know that the justices, there have been instances where the justices are deciding opinions and they hold stock in the companies that will be affected. All of that presents a conflict and undermining public confidence in our courts. It is time to say self-policing is not working. We're going to put real rules in place, and we're going to have real enforcement of those rules. In the meantime, though, 22 of us have written a letter to Justice Roberts and to Justice Thomas asking both for an explanation of how it is that Justice Thomas participated in a decision that so clearly involved his own wife, and asking for a firm commitment that there will be no participation in anything that remotely bears on what happened in the January 6th insurrection going forward.
And it seems likely that the court will have more opportunities for that, based on the way things are going. Senator Elizabeth Warren, thank you so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.